All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Taylor Clem with IFAS Extension in Nassau County, and today I'm actually joined with our new Agriculture and Natural Resource Agent, David A. Bear, and we want to start talking about starting seeds for spring. I know it's kind of crazy because it's December, but we want to have this conversation or this presentation because you can start your seeds next month in January in preparation for your spring gardens. Because I know a lot of you might be working in your garden right now with some, I saw people mentioning their carrots, their kales, a lot of their greens, their mustards, etc. It's a great time for us to be growing foods within our raised beds or whatever our gardens are that we may have. But we can always think about that next stage, that next season, so we can start having that production a little bit quicker. So today's program, we're just gonna be talking about starting seeds for spring, but feel free that anytime during this presentation, you can ask us any questions that you may have in that chat box or through the Q&A, and we're gonna be monitoring those for you. So before we get started, I wanna ask you, have you ever started seeds indoors? Feel free to put that in the chat box. And if you have started seeds indoors, what kind of things have you grown? So excellent. So a couple of responses said no, they haven't, which is totally fine, which is good. Ooh, tomatoes and peppers, yums. Those are great ones. And those are actually some of the examples that we have are tomatoes and peppers as part of this. Mostly flowers, perfect. So neat thing about this conversation is we're going to be focusing on vegetables, but anything that you can grow from seed, a lot of the same rules apply. So if you want to do ornamental stuff, perennials, annuals, you can start them inside, then we can start talking about propagation and a whole other program, but how to get those annuals prepared for your gardens. But yeah, so radishes and flowers, cucumbers, wonderful. So it looks like we have a good mixture of, some people have started things indoors, some have not. So this is a pretty general program, but I think it's going to be very beneficial because it helps answer or provide a lot of the basic information needed to help start your plants indoors this winter. So I always like to start off programs with what I call the essential questions. So at the end of this program, you should be able to answer these big questions. So those two big questions are, how do we start seeds indoors? And then when and what seeds can I start indoors? And that's going to be very generic, at least that list. But these seeds that you're seeing right here, that we actually started them not at the right time at all, but we did them as part of a program in our office, and those are tomatoes. And I'll talk a little bit about those more, but as we move forward, you're going to be able to answer these two questions, and we'll come back to them at the end as we sum up everything with today's program. So why do we want to start seeds indoors? So there's a lot of benefits, and it allows you to get an early start in the garden. There's different varieties that you can trial and play around with. So there are better varieties that you can play with because you're giving yourself a little bit extra time in that grow season. One of the great examples that I like to talk about are tomatoes, because tomatoes aren't going to like frost, but they don't like our hot temperatures either. So we have like a small window in the spring and a small window in the fall. So starting your tomatoes early is a great way to kind of get a jump, especially with some of those really cool heirloom tomatoes. So there's different varieties that we can play and use. It gives you a controlled environment. So by growing some of the seeds or starting seeds indoors, you have better control over temperature, humidity, light, etc., to help increase the germination rate of those seeds. So you can end up having way more than you need, which allows you to share with some of your friends that you may have, help provide even some of those starts for local gardens. We actually have a friend of ours here in Nassau County that he starts a lot of stuff from seeds, and whatever he doesn't use, he gives to demonstration gardens, community gardens, or schools if they need them. And it's a super handy resource, but that's just because he's creating way more than what he actually needs because he's starting from seeds. And it is a great way to save money, but gardening, like many of you know, can be a test of patience sometimes. So it's not always going to be the most easiest way to save money, but if done correctly, you can save money through your garden by providing food for your family. What are some of the other benefits that you think is like, why should we start seeds indoors? Put that in the chat box. Whoops, I scrolled. Yeah, the controlled environment. The controlled environment, I think, is like one of the biggest benefits. What are some other things that you like? This is why I'd like to start my seeds indoors. These are just some of them. Yeah, pests. So pest management, it allows us to have better control of pests because, you know, outside pathogens other pests that ends up hurting our plants, it's better to have them indoors for starting. Yeah. Grow them big, get them large enough to discourage other animals from eating other pests. Great way to start. Yeah, basil. It's a great way to start some of those other herbs. That's a good one too. It's just you're not happy with what you're finding at the home improvement stores. So it's like, I'm just going to grow my own. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, increase varieties because you can go to the store and you're going to only find, certain starts. But then when you're starting from seed, you're going to have a significant increase of varieties that you can grow because you can get those different seed varieties. Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. So those are all good recommendations. So there's like everything you are mentioning are all some wonderful benefits to how we can start seeds indoors or why we can start seeds indoors. So yeah, heirloom tomatoes. I got some cool pictures of a couple heirloom tomatoes later on as some recommendations. So let's talk about that starting seeds indoors. We're going to talk a little bit about, choosing the right container, thinking about that soil or that planting media, sowing seeds. We're going to talk about building a growing area. What are some of the best recommendations for making sure that our seeds will germinate? And then as well as seedling management. How do we manage and prepare the seeds? So like once they germinate and once they're starting to grow, how do we make sure that they are happy and healthy so we can transplant them into our garden comes when. I guess one benefit from looking at this picture, in a square footage, you can start a lot of seeds in a very small footprint. So it's really easy to start way more than enough plants than you need, and so you can share. So it's just the density per square footage is through the roof compared to once you put them in the garden, you're sowing seeds at the spacing that you want them to grow. So let's go ahead and talk about choosing a container, a proper container. There's so many different ways that you can start seeds at your house, and it's really a exercise of creativity more than anything. So you've probably all seen containers like this. You have a tray, and then you have little seed receptacles, containers that you can put into that tray. For commercial production, this is a super common practice, is just using these trays. But the biggest things that we really need to think about when selecting containers is good drainage. We do like to think about recyclability or how you can reuse materials over and over again. It's really important to think about sterilization. Is that material clean? Especially for pots or containers that we're reusing, because you can easily spread pathogens between different containers if you don't sterilize them appropriately. So just a 10% bleach solution that will help clean and sterilize your plants. There's other things that you can do, but that's going to get majority of it, and it should be totally appropriate, especially for homeowner purposes. And then also, if you're not having something that's recyclable or repurposable, something that's biodegradable that, you can compost or just end up breaking down, but choosing appropriate containers, and we'll show some of the examples that you can use. So we did have one question to pop up. Should I plant determinate or indeterminate tomato seeds in raised beds? We'll talk a little bit about that later, but you can do both. I usually do determinate in raised beds, and I put indeterminate in their own containers. but you can put both in there. So, but anyway, so choosing the container. So that's a good example is you do have those raised beds that you can use, or there's specific containers that you can use. But some other fun ones, you can literally use anything that you find around your house. Newspaper, you can make little containers that you fill with your soil media that you can plant your seeds in, and that'll break down when it's ready. You can just drop that whole thing into the ground if you'd like to. Other times, like toilet paper rolls, old yogurt cups, you can essentially use anything to make these containers from stuff that you have around the house, which is really, really nice, because if you're doing anything at the scale of a homeowner, or small beds, these are really easy to do. One thing that I know a lot of people use is just like those Dixie cups or the small little paper cups. Those are wonderful for starting seeds. They're easy. You can buy them in bulk for pretty cheap. And when you're sharing them, you can just hand them out to everybody. I can't tell you how many plants and I have received over the years that come in little Dixie cups. But those are cheap. They're easy to do. And it allows you to have a lot of, you can have as much as you need or as little as you need, and you can keep and store them. Other good ways are thinking about repurposing containers. I used to use a lot of Keurigs, but I stopped doing it because I drink way too much coffee for just single serve. But these are those like little K cups. So you just get those little K cups and you can start your seeds in those. But and that's a good way to try to reuse those with those plastics. And they're pretty, I mean, if you have them, why not? So that's a great way to repurpose those. I have seen some people, they'll get like the old, they'll have orange juice containers that they'll put on the side, like the rectangular ones. They'll cut off the top and perforate the bottom. So it has good drainage. They'll use that for starting their seeds, but pretty much, like I mentioned, anything that you can use that has good drainage, pretty much you can use that to start your seeds. So some of these containers, like the Dixie cups or like those yogurt cups, they don't have the holes in them, obviously. So you just have to poke holes in them to help encourage drainage, because you want that moisture to get in there, but you don't want it to stay. So, but anyways, K-cups. Have any of you used anything fun? Have any of you started using anything fun to start your seeds that's similar to this that we can share with everybody? You can put that in a chat box. Oh yeah, that's a great one. Egg cartons. Egg cartons. Those are perfect. Oh yeah, toilet rolls and eggs. I know some people you use an eggshell, and then you'll start to seed in there, and you can literally just plant that whole thing in the ground with the eggshell. Yeah, great. And then because that egg just helps add a little calcium to the soil. But sometimes making sure you recommend that you rinse and wash off the eggshells before you use them to help prevent any type of bacteria growing on them. But eggs are perfect. Good. Pudding cup containers. Yeah. So, I mean, you can kind of see it's a great way to repurpose or reuse any of the things that you already have. And a lot of the plastic ones like K-cups or the yogurt containers, pudding containers, those are things that you can reuse. So yeah, someone just said they grabbed their K-cup from the trash. Perfect. So now let's talk about growing mediums. So we know that, we're talking about containers that need good drainage. That's great. That's great for putting our seeds in, but now we need to think about our growing medium. So to be honest, just a general garden mix, a soil mix will be sufficient for a homeowner. It'll be successful. But there are ways. So if you just go to the store and just buy a general potting mix, cool, that'll work out. But there are other ways that we can mix our own soils which we know is better for the seeds and can actually increase seed germination or make those plants be more successful before we transplant them out into our garden. So there's a few different soil mixes that you can do. And don't worry, you're going to get a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. So you'll be able to come back and look at these mixes, but also on one of University of Florida's websites, we actually have these mixtures listed as well. But anyways, so you can mix your own. You can do like an equal part perlite and equal part compost. There's another mixture that you can do that's equal part vermiculite. With vermiculite compost and just like your native topsoil. But say you're doing a bunch of seed starts, and you want to make a really big batch. This large quantity mixture is great actually for seed starting, where you use 30 quarts of brown peat, 20 quarts of sand or perlite, 20 quarts of compost, 10 quarts of just soil, and then a half a cup of lime if needed. We apply that lime just because the peat is very acidic, so the lime kind of gets it up into an ideal pH range. So that's for if you are doing a lot of seed, but starting a lot of seed, but I know a lot of people to get all that material, they'll mix it all together and then they have a giant tub full of seed mix that they like to use for their seeds that they use consistently throughout the year. So that is a great mixture. And when we talk about 30 quarts, usually just those 10 quart buckets is your measuring tool. So you just dump your raw materials into a big container and just mix it all up and you're good as gold. So there are different soil mixes, but if you're doing something small, use what you got, get something simple and easy. You can go just get a soil mix, but if you want to build your own, absolutely you will benefit from it. But there's other ways when we're talking about, you can build your own soil, but there's ways that we can always think about why our soil is so important, because what's living in our soil is unbelievably beneficial to our plants. And we have a lot of things called like our soil beneficials. They're like our microbes. So that's bacteria, I can never say that right. The actinomycetes. David, can you pop on and pronounce that one correctly? There's fungi. Do you know it? How do you pronounce it?
Actinomycetes.
Oh, your microphone's not working.
Actinomycetes.
So there's his microphone's not working, but it's acidomycetes, I believe. There's fungi, protozoa, nematodes. And like sometimes we hear this things like, oh no, that's what's killing all the plants. But actually there's way more beneficials in the soil. And what they're doing is they're helping. Oh, you all can hear him? Good. Oh man, I don't know, David, I don't know why I couldn't hear you, but they heard you. Perfect. Okay, good. So these are all these different things. They create relationships within the soil, and that can help with seed germination. That can help with the sustainable plant health. So as a plant grows, a much healthier plant, and you can actually, inoculate your soils with some of these beneficial microorganisms that can help build soil health. And what you're seeing right here in this image is mycorrhizae, which is the relationship between the plant root and fungus or fungi. So that's kind of what mycorrhizae stands for, as the Latin terms is myco, mycelium, and rhizae, roots. So it's that relationship, and they can help share nutrients and carbohydrates within the plants and help with uptake efficiency. So they're reaching out and helping grab more nutrients around that rhizosphere area, around the root zone. But anyways, you can put this into your soil if you want. I know some people do, but again, you don't have to. But it's a cool way to think about like how our soil is alive and living and how we directly benefit from it. And usually from just these basic soil mixes, we don't get that. But it is happening for the most part within our soils naturally. And the benefits are it can prevent dampening off, and dampening off is a fungal pathogen that essentially can kill your seedlings. Once they germinate, it just kind of dies, and that's just a disease that we try to prevent. It can increase nutrient and moisture uptake efficiency and increase germination and plant growth success. So now let's talk a little bit about sowing. How do you sow your seeds? We're now at the point we talked about containers, we talked about soil. Next, we're going to be talking about actually the seeds and sowing them. So we start to think about, when should I plant? So it really, when you should plant your seeds indoors is based off of your last frost. So in North Florida, we're kind of like around March 10th. So there's a certain period. It's like, okay, we want to be able to, like, our tomatoes, some of our peppers, eggplants. There's a lot of plants that are very susceptible to those frosts, those spring garden plants. And we want to make sure that they're ready to go, they're healthy and happy, and we can put them out into our garden. But we don't want to put them in the garden until after that last frost. So we try to go back in time. It's a little estimate, but so we look at that last frost, and that's kind of how we judge when we have to sow our seeds for the earliest planting time. But it's going to be really important that when we think about sowing those seeds or planting them, there's a couple things that we need to consider. So if you buy seed packs, always read the label, because it's going to give you some recommendations about what to do to that seed before you plant them or sow them. Some seeds need to be soaked in water. Others actually need to be scratched. And so there's different situations where we'd have different recommendations for different seeds on how to prepare them for sowing. But then the sowing depth is going to be important. It's not always consistent, but kind of a general rule of thumb is planting depth is 2 to 3 times the seed diameter. So essentially, the larger the seed, the little bit deeper that you end up planting it, for most plants, not all. But then we start to think, okay, so we're sowing the seeds, we plant them, we put them at the depth that they need to go. What are some of those important things that we need to think about for seed germination? And that's really moisture. So you need to have about 90% moisture. So that's good wet soil. You need to keep the soil moist, but you don't want it saturated, because you need airflow. You need air circulation to still exist within that soil. Otherwise, the seeds won't germinate, they just rot. So you need a good temperature, so like 55 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. You have good consistent light throughout most of the day. So you need about 14 to 16 hours of light. And you need to have that good oxygen and airflow. So when you're preparing, again, plant your seeds at 2 to 3 times the depth of the seed. Usually seed packers will give you a little recommendation. But I always recommend pre-wetting the soil. Excuse me, pre-wet the soil. Make sure it's not saturated, just damp, so it kind of clumps up a little bit, and then you can sow those seeds. And then you're gonna have to water consistently. Usually every single day. You can spritz the water, don't saturate, but you can like spritz the water, make sure it stays wet. Good acronym, not acronym, a good way that I've remembered is, you want it to be nice and humid and wet. You don't want it to be a swampy. So don't make it a swampy growing medium. Otherwise, your plants will die, or the seeds won't germinate. So sowing those seeds is going to be important, obviously, at that correct depth. And then another thing is help with that, maintain the humidity. What I like to do, not everybody does it, but it does help out, is I put little covers on my growing containers. And that helps hold that moisture and humidity in. One strategy that I'll do is, if I know that I'm going to be stepping away for a little bit and I might not be able to water it the next day, I've actually, with that container, I'll put it on, and then I'll put, if I have an open space, a shallow bowl of water, and actually put a little sponge in that shallow bowl. So it helps disperse moisture. So it makes it really humid in there. So then that water collects and then drops down to the soil. So that helps keep it happy for a temporary amount of time, but don't keep it on there permanently. You're going to have to, I usually recommend is every day or so, take it off for a little bit, or every couple of days, take it off, let it breathe, because you need that air to circulate within there. So you can put those covers on. You can also just do a thin layer of just plastic wrap, goes over the top of it, totally fine. I like using, when I'm using those black plastic trays, I like to use those clear domes. just because it helps with once the plants start to germinate and grow and you're starting to get those sets of leaves, it still gives you a little height where you can put that container on it and kind of keep the plants, keep those humid conditions. So we want to think about the lighting and how can we grow? Where should we put them indoors? So there's a couple recommendations. So we're thinking about building that grow area or where you want to start sowing those seeds. You know, you want to think about that temperature. Someone mentioned earlier that they were in that how do you timing for sowing seeds if, like, say you're in Tennessee. You know, you can actually get heating pads that sit underneath your seed trays to help keep everything nice and warm, especially if you're starting your seeds in a spot where it's going to get a little chillier. It kind of helps keep it within that 55 to 75 degree range for seed germination. So, and then also, you know, the light conditions. You don't need, if you have a grow light, you don't need to actually put the seeds next to a window. In fact, we prefer that if you have a grow light, that's going to be the most preferred, and you don't put your seeds next to a window or a windowsill unless you have to, because what's going to start happening is your seeds will germinate, your plants start to germinate, and then they'll grow, and then they'll start growing towards the window. So as they grow towards the window, that can increase the just toppling over and causing breakage. What you need to do is you need to rotate the seed tray around so then they start bending back straight. So that's a drawback of putting it next to windows. You'll actually see those plants start to grow a little cockeyed. So excuse me. So what you can do is if you're next to a window, you can rotate the seeds, but in our winter time, it's obviously our shorter time of day. So getting that 14 to 16 hours isn't always going to be practical. So just because, you know, in Florida, that's our short time of day, is we're going to probably get 12 hours of sunlight, not too much. Is that enough for plants to start for seed starting? Not too well. So you know, this is just an LED light that I just got at a local shop here in town in Callahan. And I just hung it from a PVC frame that I built that hangs out over the plants. And I just have a timer set on it. And that timer kicks on at 5 a.m. and then turns, or I'd have to double check, 5 or 6 a.m. And then it cuts off because it just gets sunlight through the day. And then I have it turn on again in the evening to make sure it gets that extra out time of light in the afternoon, evening time, and then it cuts off because the plants need to rest. They can't have consistent light on them all the time. You need that light to turn off in order for them to be have that moment of rest. So you could theoretically, you could put this anywhere in your house if you have a grow light. That's just an LED grow light, so it's not going to get too terribly hot. But it's important to know that the light distribution whenever you're using these grow lights isn't consistent. So it's the brightest in the center and it's dimmer as you get to the edge. So I know that's just something to just consider. Sometimes I know people will move their seeds trays around to try to optimize the light for them, or to try to distribute the light amongst the seeds as much as possible as they're growing. So this, what you see in this picture, this is just an example. Actually, it's still in our office right now. We started a program with 4-H. We call it our Space Tomatoes as part of Tomato Sphere. And the reason we started them is just because it's when the program was running. But we have some seeds. We're not sure which ones. So some tomato seeds actually spent time on the International Space Station, and the others are just regular old tomato seeds just from here on Earth. And we're seeing if the exposure to space has an impact on seed germination. And this is a project that's ran like NASA and the Canadian Space Agency, and a bunch of schools are growing tomatoes all over the country, all over the North America, to kind of do this study. So we're participating. So we set this up to kind of to see what our results are. We still don't know which ones are the space tomatoes, but nonetheless, we've had really good germination from both sets, which is really cool. So, and now they're much bigger than this. This is from a few weeks ago. We have our second set of leaves that are forming on some of our tomatoes, and we're going to soon switch some of these to hydroponics. like little hydroponics in like little containers, so we can keep growing them, especially the ones we know that are the space tomatoes. So, but if you're over by our office in Callahan, feel free to stop by, and you can check out our tomatoes. But anyways, so we're just growing these in our office and they're doing pretty well. And it's just that LED light hanging from a PVC frame that I just have running in the morning and the evening. And it's getting that 14 to 16 hours, and we water it every single day, just to make sure that it's wet but not saturated, because we need that oxygen to be able to flow through it. So once you start growing, you have great seed germination, you still want to talk about seed management. We want to make sure that our seeds germinate, but then they stay happy and healthy as they continue to grow before we take them and transplant them out into the garden. So here's a couple things that we're going to talk about. So just making sure that you're having consistent, adequate soil moisture. You don't want saturated, but you want to make sure that they're getting enough water and there's good drainage. So great question. So someone just asked about the lighting. So it's important to have 2 light periods per day rather than 1 long one. So it's 1 long one, but what we're doing is we're just using the daylight as part of our long light period, but the grow light is adding extra time by adding that morning period, and it turns off once the sun is up. And then once the sun starts to go down, it kicks back on. So then we have that, it continues that long light period to make sure we get to that 14 to 16 hours of light per day. So it's a really good question. So sometimes we can jump into a whole other discussion on lighting period and color and times and lights, or sorry, light types, but that's a whole other discussion for another day. So I do think our space tomatoes are suffering a little from elongation, which actually is a result from lighting. But anyways, it's not going to impact them. It's not that severe. But so that's a good question about the lighting, but we just have it kick on in the morning and we kick on the evening just to have 1 long period. It just extends that, and we're just using that daylight period as our part of that. But anyways, so seedling management, adequate soil moisture. So it's really tempting. It's so tempting that once you start to see it germinate, it's like, okay, I'm going to fertilize. I'm going to get those nutrients down to help it out. But you got to be so careful because the plants, they are still living off of the nutrients that they have stored within the seed. And they got everything that they need to get themselves going. So you need to wait until like the first true sets of leaves appear, because like the seed will germinate and you'll get this first like little leaf that pops up. But it's not the true leaves, it's just part of the seed. And then it'll start to grow its true leaves after that. And once those are developed, that's when you can fertilize. And you can fertilize, you just baby feed just a little bit, just a tiny little bit. Sometimes I know people will get a liquid fertilizer and they'll cut it in half. They'll dilute it with water, and then that's what they'll apply down at this low rate, because you don't want to apply too much. If you put too much fertilizer down, the nutrients in it can hurt the roots, and you don't want that. So we'll talk a little bit more about hardening off. So hardening off is that process of getting them from indoors, where they've been babied and pampered, and next thing you know, you're going to throw them out into the world of hot, and who knows when it's going to rain. Well, you're going to be irrigating and watering probably, but pest, disease, so hardening off, we'll talk about that. But also when you're in those containers, you have to be very careful about plants getting root bound. So they actually are in those containers for too long, and they start to choke themselves out because the roots start girdling and circling in on the plant. So sometimes if those plants, before you move them outside, start to get too big, you might need to move them to a larger container to keep them from getting root bound. But also handle with care. Be very careful with them, because when you're moving them, transplanting them, they are very, very delicate. So just make sure you handle with care, because I've seen a lot of times where people go to move something and just kind of breaks, the roots fall off, or the plant breaks in half, the root's still in the soil. You just got to be very careful and handle the plants with care. And then also a common insect that we can see within our gardens and our younger plants are more susceptible to that damage, and that is called black cutworm or just cutworm. And you can see actually the toilet paper that's sitting around the plant. So it's just the worm that'll be on the soil, and one morning you can come over and your plant's just falling over, and that is because the cutworm just gnawed through the plant. And doing something like that can actually completely prevent that damage from happening or keep them from being able to chew through it. Usually if you're growing things in containers, they're already going to be safe, not necessarily raised beds. So cutworm, and I'll send you this information, but they're just the little worms that we can see that can cause some damage to our garden. And our younger plants are more susceptible to their damage. So now let's talk a little bit hardening off. So hardening off is that process of taking them from indoors. We germinated them, they're happy, they're healthy, yay. Now we got to get them prepared to take them outside. And you want to start hardening them off about 7 to 10 days before you're actually transplanting into the garden. And usually what you're doing is you're just gradually exposing them to newer elements. Your garden is going to be in full sun, so don't just throw your plants out into the full sun. Put them out in the shade, kind of like a part shade location. And you can kind of increase the amount of sun that they're exposed to over time. Watch the soil. The soil will dry out much quicker than it did indoors. And then it mentions about blocking out about 3 days before moving. So that's actually trying to remove them from the containers. You don't necessarily have to do that. Don't feed them or don't fertilize them. I don't like that word. Don't fertilize them and then water less. Because once you plop them down into the soil, they're going to start looking for nutrients. They're going to start looking for moisture. So they're going to start shooting roots out into the soil to help make them do better with that new planting into that bed. And then, but do water right before transplanting. And then ideal to transplant on a cloudy day, a partly cloudy day. Just because it's not going to have that direct sun, they're not going to dry out as quickly. So you're just kind of protecting them. It's just that slow transition, getting them to those conditions that they're going to be growing out into the garden. So if you just take them from inside and just plop them out in your garden, more than likely they won't be successful because that transition to that new environment is going to be really tough on them. So now let's talk about, we talked about the containers, the soil media. We talked about, setting up that grow area, kind of the management of those seedlings, and sowing the seeds. So there's a lot of things that we did talk about. So now, we learned about the basics of starting seeds indoors. Now let's talk about, when and what seeds. So timing, again, is going to be very important. We talked about that March 10th kind of being that rough last frost date. So we're starting plants thinking back from that frost date about when's the best time to start them indoors. And some of them we can start them in January, early to mid-January. So again, and then also think about the source. Where are you getting your seeds from? You do have to be a little cautious sometimes on where you're getting your seeds. And then we'll talk a little bit about plant recommendations, and we'll talk about some sharing at that point where, what are some other plants that people might want to start from seed indoors for the spring. So seed source is so important. You can go get commercial hybrids, you can get heirloom seeds, you can get some local seeds, you can save your own seeds. People are trading and transplanting seeds and moving them all around, which is really, really cool. But it's really important to think about what was the success of that seed prior to you getting it. Now, if you're collecting from a Master Gardener volunteer, if you're getting it from someone that that knows their garden really, really well, just through trades, that's really good, because some of the concerns that we have is you can actually transplant viruses through seeds. So if you got a seed from a plant that had some virus, you could easily move that to your garden unintentionally through that seed. So you just got to make sure that the health is that seed is coming from that plant is healthy. But typically if you're buying them in packets from the store or whatever, they are going to go through a process to make sure that they are good high quality seeds to put into your garden. I know the libraries, a lot of them have seed trading. So you can actually go and there's seeds there, a seed library that you can pick through to see what they have available. So there's so many different ways that you can get your seeds, but the trading of seeds is always really neat just because that's where you can probably find some of the very unique heirloom varieties that are traded amongst gardeners. You can still find them online, but sometimes you can pay a pretty penny for some heirloom variety seeds. But honestly, there was a seed shortage for a while, as there was everywhere. For everything, but a lot of our seed inventories are actually picking back up. Some of our online seed providers that you can go through and order from, majority of their inventory was completely closed out and there was nothing you could find. It made it very difficult, but I think we've overcome that now. And that's just because during the pandemic, there was a really high demand for home gardening. So people were ordering seeds quicker than we could collect seeds. And is there a local seed library in Nassau County? Yes. I will give that contact information. I think it's just at the public library in Yulee. I think they have one, but let me double check before I send that out. And I know that that's actually becoming a very common thing, is public libraries are becoming those places where you can find those seed libraries. So think about beyond just sowing seeds, think about those plant recommendations. I'm going to send this document to you. One of the best documents I think that University of Florida has with regard to just gardening in general is the Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide. It tells you the best time, if you're like in North Florida, Central Florida, South Florida, the best time to plant plants as seeds, when to transplant them. If they're already transplants, the best time to put them in your garden. It provides everything that you need. So this is a great way that you can kind of look at some general plants that you can grow, when you can plant them, etc. But it's not limited to, because I guarantee you there's way more variety of things that you can actually grow that goes beyond what's listed in this publication. But it's a great go-to resource I'm going to share with all of you. And you can find online, but I'm just going to send you a document so you can have it immediately. Have any of you used this publication before? You can put in the chat box yes, no, or not sure. A lot of no's. Oh, I use it. Cool. So yeah, I'll share this with you all. This is a really cool resource. It has a table and charts in it on everything you need to know. It's really super duper handy. When we actually look at the annual, like all the publications that the university has, this is like the second most shared publication university wide throughout the state. So let's talk about some of the plant recommendations. The big ones are always tomatoes, just because tomatoes, people love growing them. They're staples in the garden. So we'll talk a little bit about them. Plants deep, that's always an important recommendation in our gardens, which is different than most other plants. But I always like to tell people, like, if you can grow tomatoes in Florida, you can grow anything, because growing tomatoes in Florida is surprisingly difficult. But starting seeds with tomatoes can really, really help get them out into the landscape or your garden. But when we're thinking about things that you want to start planting in January, tomatoes, you can plant them or sow the seeds about 6 to 8 weeks before that last frost. So you can start sowing them next month. And there's two different varieties. There's determinate and indeterminate varieties that we had a question earlier about what's the best place to put them. So I like to say determinate. You can put either or in a container or a raised bed, but a determinate, it's like a predetermined size that tomato will grow. And so putting those in raised beds are good because you know where they're going to go. Indeterminate, they keep growing. So you want to give them something that they can grow on, like a trellis. You can't put them in raised beds. Usually I'll put them on the same like vertical trellis I'll grow beans on the north side of the raised beds. But tomatoes, 6 to 8 weeks before that frost, plant deep in soil into that full sun. Heavy feeders and drinkers, they use a lot. But anyway, so let me talk a little bit about those varieties that are tasty that you can grow. They're great for starting with seed. So the black crim heirloom, this one's super tasty. Oh, so tasty. And it's an indeterminate. Indeterminates look a little messy, but my goodness, they're the gift that keeps on giving. If you get one successful, it's going to keep growing and keep flowering throughout the entire season. And I know some people have been very successful at getting indeterminates to last even through our summers, which is really cool. A green zebra, I love this one. It's another heirloom. It's an indeterminate. It's a little bit smaller, 2 to 4 ounces, but it's different heirlooms that are bred together. It's very high yielding, and it doesn't have a very strong punch of a flavor. It's a little bit more gentle of a flavor. I like the term. And one reason I also like this, because I think it looks really neat, is it does look like, so the tomatoes are in the Solanaceae plant family. So that's the same thing as like nightshade, and nightshade is unbelievably toxic. It'll kill you. Some of the plants will kill you in like a flip of a switch almost if ingested. But they produce beautiful flowers. The whole family produces beautiful flowers and beautiful fruits. And then this tomato, specific tomato, looks very similar to some of those very toxic nightshades that are only very, very tiny, but this has that kind of the same coloration. So it looks really, really cool. But that's the green zebra. So if you want something that's a very traditional, like red tomato, we have a couple that are really good. The Floridade heirloom, and that's a variety cultivated by UF. It's heat tolerant, which is really, really good. It's a determinate. It has a little bit longer maturity compared to some of the others. But because it's heat tolerant, which is really good, that allows us to have a tomato that can grow through the hotter parts of our summers. Another great one, this is the Better Boy hybrid. Again, this is another one that was cultivated in Florida. It's indeterminate, which I like. Has a much larger fruit size, 16 ounces, so like a pound. Really good flavor. It's resistant to some of our diseases, verticillium, Fusarium wilt, and nematodes. And I like this one because I call it the perfect sandwich tomato, because you can have one slice that can sit like perfectly on a sandwich, a hamburger, whatever it is. So some of the other recommendations that you want to think about 8 to 10 weeks before that frost date, eggplants and peppers, again, Solanaceae family. So same as the tomatoes, excuse me. They are most susceptible to nematodes, so starting them indoors can really help, but also thinking about nematode management for your garden. That's a whole other conversation. But so make sure you rotate your plants around your garden. Never plant them in the same spot. The peppers are great for containers or raised beds. Eggplant, usually I prefer in raised beds. You can't put them in larger containers, but they still do well nonetheless. Some of my favorite, when you go to the store and you see a regular old eggplant, I don't like those. I don't think they taste good. But I like what's called like the Chinese eggplants. Are much longer. And they have way more flavor. So like this is a great one, that ping tongue long eggplant. Delicious. You're planting it 8 to 10 weeks before that last frost. Fish peppers, these are tiny but mighty, but they are delicious. They're used a lot in the Northeast. We don't grow them too much here, but they do well. And also these look really good as ornamental peppers. So you could put these somewhere else in your landscape and use them for the ornamental qualities, kind of like an annual plant. But they take about 80 days, but again, that 8 to 10 weeks towards maturity. And then the giant Marconi peppers, those are nice. They're like more of a smoky sweet flavor. I know some people that will take them and actually dry them and smoke them kind of, or roast them. But they're pretty yummy. They are they're resistant to tobacco mosaic virus, which is just a virus that can impact a lot of our plants. But if you keep picking them, kind of like you deadhead a flower, but if you keep picking them, they'll keep producing all throughout the year until frost. So it's really cool. Once you get them going, they'll keep giving fruits till the end of the year. But anyways, we can talk more about varieties, but I want to make sure that we open up the door for questions or anything that you all might have. But again, we'll wrap back around and we'll talk about those essential questions. So there's like, how do we start seeds indoors? So we talked about the soil containers, making sure they have good drainage. We talked about the medium, how to sow the seeds correctly, how to manage those seedlings to grow. We're talking about temperature, daylight, setting up an area in your house to grow those seeds indoors, but then just managing them and preparing them to put into the garden. And once they're in the garden, it's just managing your vegetable garden like normal. But by following these steps, you'll be very, very successful in starting seeds and having a lot of variety that you can pick from and ready to go in the spring. And then we just talked about some of the basic varieties that you can get going right off bat, but there's so many more that you can grow in your garden. But the biggest thing is talking about the timing is that last frost is March 10th is our general frost. So work back from there, and that's the best time to start those seeds. So we're looking around January, mid-January to end January to start those seeds. So then you'll have good plants that you can put in March. So, but just as always with IFAS Extension, we're just at your fingertips. You can reach out to us. We have two offices, obviously, we do have two offices in Nassau County. Callahan is our main office, main extension office, but we also have the Yulee Annex, which is over off of Pages Dairy Road. And our new office, we actually have a new property and office that's under construction. It's over on Minor Road in Yulee, and that will become our permanent office in the spring. But we'll still have the Callahan office as well. But feel free to reach out to us or Master Gardener Volunteer Help Desk. But you can also reach out to David or myself, in the county extension office about anything that you're wanting to grow, anything like that. Feel free to reach out to us. But anyways, now we'll open it up because I know we're getting low on time, but open up to any questions that you all may have. Oops. So should your seedlings be placed in a window facing a particular direction? So in this situation, I would say if you're using a window, use the best one that you got. But if you have a window, you want to make sure it's not on the north side because you're not going to get much light at all. But you do got to be careful having on the south side because it's going to be a lot more direct sunlight. A bright light that's out of the direct sun would be most ideal because that direct sun will dry out your seedlings much quicker. So you want them to kind of make sure you have that consistent moisture. So making sure that you put your seedlings in a window or around a window where they're getting bright light out of the direct sun, that's going to be most ideal. But if you do put it in the direct sun, like on the south or western side of your house, one of those windows, then you may need to water it more consistently to make sure it stays a little damp. That's a good question. After listening to this, how many of you are going to, what kind of seeds are you interested in starting indoors? Oh, that's a good question. Is there any advantage, disadvantage to placing the tray on a table on the lanai? So the only thing that would be a concern for the lanai is that it is just open to the elements. So if we know that we're going to have a frost, bring them inside, or if we're going to have those really cold nights, bring your seeds inside to keep them safe. You can get protection from the lanai, but not enough that if we get a bad frost, it might still cause damage. But, good air circulation and depending on what kind of screen you can have, You know, with those little seedlings still being outside, they should be all right, no problem, but just keep an eye on it for pests because you can still get white flies in your lanai. And inside you have very low chance of getting white flies. That's a very good question. So yeah, it looks like we have tomatoes and basil as some plants that people want to put into their gardens or try starting from seeds. Yeah. Is it better to grow tomato plants in a container instead of an elevated garden? So not necessarily. Because of tomatoes just in general are very susceptible to root knot nematode. And when you have nematodes in a raised bed, managing those nematodes can be very difficult because it can require you to essentially completely replace all the soil in the raised bed, which is like last resort, or you're going to have to solarize those beds in the summer to help kill those nematodes off. So a nice thing is if you do your tomatoes in a container, it's much easier to replace the soil in a container than it is a raised bed. So that's one of the benefits. But really, it's just whatever is best in what you have available. The indeterminates might do better in a container just because of the size that they get. But as long as you're doing good nematode management for your garden, you shouldn't have a big issue putting those tomatoes in that elevated garden. So that's a very good question. Oh, that's a really good question. Oh, that's a good recommendation. I like that one. So someone mentioned is native edible plants and herbs as a potential class in the future. Yes, there's a lot that we can, like, if you're just walking around, there's a lot that you can find that you can eat, but you just have to be so careful. Identification is the most important thing about any of that. But nonetheless, a lot of those plants, once you're identifying, you can grow them in your property pretty easily. Now, chicken of the woods, that one's a little bit harder to do, but it is possible. So like chicken of the woods, lion's mane, two of our edible mushrooms that grow around here pretty easily and are unbelievably tasty. So that would be a fun class. So yeah, someone mentioned that they have seeds from their ornamental, like zinnias. Totally can be successful. Any of your ornamental plants, if you can start from seed, you can do it the same exact way. It's just thinking about that frost dates. But if you're not too concerned about the frost dates, but you just want to start them from seed, so you got something that you can move up to larger pots because it's way easier and cheaper, by all means, just start sowing them. And once they're ready, pot them up. And once they're ready to go into your garden, hard them off and put them out in the garden. Same process, same everything. It's just you might not be as concerned about the freezes. With all of our programs, I'm putting the link, I'll send it in the email as well. All of our programs, I always like to evaluate to see, how it did, what we're learning. That gives you an opportunity to give us feedback on our programs. Excuse me. So feel free, that Qualtrics link, just a quick 2-3 minute online survey. You can do it now, or just go ahead and open it up on your web browser and you can fill it out. When I send out my follow-up email, either tomorrow or Wednesday, probably tomorrow, I'll include all of this information so you can do it then. But, I appreciate it if you all could fill that out. So let's see, more questions. I have a very large number of garlic chive seeds. Yes. Yeah, so garlic chives, oh man, wonderful. Those are easy to plant as seeds. And that's a nice thing, is once you learn how to collect and harvest those seeds, you can grow so much on your property or on your garden that it just keeps on cycling. So David, do you have any words of wisdom or anything like that? Because David has a background in agriculture and soil microbiology and all that stuff. So he's a pit of wisdom.
No, I thought this was really good, and I really appreciate the comment about the native edibles, plants / herbs, and learning how to cultivate your own edible mushrooms on your property, especially on a lot of people in Nassau County are near some old growth forests. They might have some of that even on their property. That's an excellent area to start doing that. And one thing that I wanted to bring up, that I personally, when I'm bumping up my seedlings into the next stage, like whether it's from like a Dixie cup to like a solo cup or something, I've found through my experience is that if you water the plant, you want to wait until the water is kind of like absorbed, maybe over like a day before you transfer it, because if you water it right away and then try to scoop it out, the soil will be real soggy and you'll end up with a mess, and you could damage the plant. So I usually wait like a day for the water to absorb so that the root mass is kind of damp but not wet. That's the only thing that other than that, it was a great presentation. I really enjoyed it.
That's a really good recommendation. That's right. That's good. Yeah, because I've done that before where you try to transplant something and the soil's still saturated or too saturated, and you pull it up and just like the soil is so heavy at that point, just kind of just like sloughs off of the roots. And it's like, well, that's not good. Then you're doing a bare root transplant, which isn't the end of the world, but the plants do not like it. So any other questions anybody has? Oh, so someone mentioned they may have a chicken in the woods in their yard, but would like to know a resource for identifying and learning about such things. So yeah, oh my goodness. Yeah, let me see if I can find the title of the book. It's on my bookshelf. There is this real, if you want to take pictures of it and send it to us, we also have some other resources that it's free with UF. You can actually send in pictures and mushrooms, and we'll have our specialists that specialize in mycology. They'll help with identification. But there is a book that is called, and you can actually find it on UF's online bookstore. I'll find it. I'll send it on that email. But it's all about Florida mushroom identification. So it's a lot of the common mushrooms that you can see growing within our area, and talks all about the identification, because identification of mushrooms. I know people that go foraging for mushrooms. I don't trust myself. So enough. There's some like really obvious ones, like lion's mane when you see lion's mane. But anyway, so I'll send you that link or that book title, because it's a cool one. So maybe David and I'll do a class one time that's all about growing mushrooms at home. So because it's actually very easy. So one time I did we tried to grow, we very successfully, we grew oyster mushrooms and lion's mane. And my wife was like, yeah, sure, go for it. Not thinking it'd be successful. And next thing you know, it was just like we were overwhelmed with the amount of mushrooms that we were growing. But it's surprisingly easy to do. Anyways, all right. Well, I will stop the share. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but I appreciate you all joining us, and we'll have some programs coming up in the future. So keep an eye out for everything that we're doing. And if you'll see, if you're on our listserv, we'll send out all of our updates of all upcoming programs. Next month, we're doing citrus on the on the 12th and fruit trees on the 26th of January. And we're actually doing those in Yulee at the annex. So keep an eye out for that registration. And then those classes are 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. But anyways, I look forward to seeing you all. Give us a holler if you have any questions, and thank you for joining us, and happy holidays.